listening. And for the reminder for folks, we do put our recordings out on our YouTube playlist following each of our calls. Really kind of two topics that we wanted to cover today. So the last time that we met in our governance session, we had kind of discussed, and tried to gauge interest in having the CA baseline be one of the parties that's providing kind of feedback into an early preview of the CA Core Plus profiles that are coming out from kind of the earliest iterations of the framework. Folks were kind of, wanting to have a better gauge of, what dates and how do they align to some of the other commitments we have, around that same time period. And so the call from last week was, come to the ballot education session, where we're also going to talk about some of the kind of upcoming dates, and think on it, see how we feel, and then come back this session and our next CA baseline session to really kind of gauge that, okay, are these reasonable for us to kind of move forward, and reasonable expectations for providing feedback on a very small subset. The second item that I want to get through, well, actually, I would say is the majority of really what we want to talk about today on the profiling side. And that's getting through some of the tickets that we had kind of started to change last week, but wanted to confirm whether or not the change was what we wanted to holistically apply to a number of other extensions. So we've got a couple community issue log items that I've kind of grouped today in terms of both kind of decisioning, as well as some that we can apply on the spot. Is there anything else that we want to make sure makes its way on the agenda today? Okay. All right. So I just basically took this slide from our last call on last Friday, and I'll reiterate kind of what I heard, and then we can kind of add to it, refine it. But the first ask was, is there kind of an interest in this being one of the targeted groups to provide feedback on this kind of subset, like patient, practitioner role org of those CA Core Plus profiles? And what I heard was, we're interested, and we're kind of mixed on the timing of it. We're a bit concerned about existing commitments. We know that in that kind of, particularly in the early January period, HL7 International is doing their own ballots, and some of the content that's going forward that many of us will probably be interacting with are around, R6 in particular. And so we have a lot more sensitivity around wanting to make sure we're comfortable with those dates. I wanted to pull up the dates that we're kind of proposing for there to be like an open period to provide feedback on those kind of early subset, and then compare them. I suppose I should probably make this a little bit larger. Compare them against what I pulled up for the HL7 International ballot and working group meeting dates. So really the period where we would anticipate probably having kind of that early view would be prior to January, but the window in which we'd be submitting feedback, whether that be kind of independently or just spending our sessions going through the content and providing it, would be this kind of month window halfway through January into the second half of the month of February. And that compares pretty well. So while it's happening during the HL7 International cycle, the thing I wanted to call out is that it's really only about a week of overlap. And that's intentional more so for some of the other specifications that are going through a similar process, where we want to ensure anything that comes out, for instance, of any content that would impact, CAFEX or patient summary, to have the opportunity to plug that in, and also to potentially plug any of our feedback upwards. But if you're thinking about being heavily, I think, involved in any of the ballots that are being put forward in HL7 International this year, I want to gauge that level of comfortability with these dates too, because we know obviously it would be a kind of 1 month into the next, but now that you've actually seen it, how are folks kind of feeling about it? We have, a couple months before the open, are we feeling like it'd be reasonable to at least try to do something, at least in the time that we have on our Friday calls in this period, even if we can't commit to kind of all of it?
Well,
Sorry, I missed the connection between Friday calls and a review period.
Oh, so just in that, I think the last time we met, folks were wanting to have a little bit more time to go through it, both the content and like the feedback. And so I think what I put up last time was we could really do this however we want. So we could use the Friday calls to go through the content. We could use the calls to get feedback on the content if folks were worried about providing it independently, like as a means of supporting the overall exercise. So it's really how folks want to use that time.
yeah, the week of the working group meeting and the week before are all consuming for those that are participating in it. Nothing else happens.
And the week
Particularly
after for
Yes.
catching up.
Yeah, particularly since it's on UTC.
And so like the thinking is that, like, are you thinking from like an independent perspective, really the last week in the period would be of this period, like the only window for some folks that are playing that catch-up game to provide that feedback?
Okay, I really can't see what that date is.
Let me just here. Is that better?
Yes.
Because my thinking is like, if we wanted to like look at the content together, ahead of the the HL7 ballot, which we know, like, I mean, I don't know, not everybody's like me. I usually wait to the second half of it to provide my comments, but my hope is that, we could look at the content together so that like at least that part is falling in a window where we don't have a lot, where some of us don't have those competing commitments. And then like there's always that additional period of review for folks to kind of, either to submit their comments. And it's a wide window, it's a month, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are others feeling about it? Are there other, I mean, we talked a lot about HL7 International because it came up last week, but are there other things that are impacting our considerations around kind of these two windows? Oh, wow, that doesn't help you if it's covered up. Because the reason, I'll just be clear, the reason I'm asking is like, obviously it's ideal if we can kind of try to put this through the same kind of administrative cycles as we are for the other specifications. But if the group is like, you know what, I want to see this, like there is a kind of a consensus that, plus or minus 2 weeks the other direction would be helpful or more, then we kind of like, we have that ability to kind of talk that through. But what I'm trying to gauge is like whether this is like a slight hesitancy or we need to kind of look at other avenues for dates.
Well, I think I'm in the minority, and Elliot maybe, of the group that's really heavily involved in the international WGM. So I would defer to what others think.
I know I'm going to call some people out on the spot, but I know like Randy, and I don't think Ken is on, but like you folks, we both had mentioned that kind of trying to thread the needle a bit in that wanting something that you could see early, but also trying to obviously balance that with other commitments that you have. Like, where are these kind of falling on your assessment of that?
From our side, we've got a bunch of stuff with our patient summary stuff we have to get done before. Well, the timing's really trying to get it through before when this release is available for review. So it depends how close we get to finishing in that time frame. And then we've got review of that stuff. Plus there's the Christmas break in there. So there's not a lot of time between this December 15th kind of thing and January 15th for much to happen there. And then you've only got another week, 4 weeks after that. So like, I see it's a tight constraint, but at the same point, because future work we're doing needs to see this stuff go through. So I don't really want to see it get pushed back either. So I don't know what the solution is, because I mean, we're going to have a lot of stuff going on all at once, and whether we can fit it in. And there's going to be prioritization stuff.
And can we get all of our major tickets done before this opens?
Oh yeah, so you're saying like the competing priorities for like our meeting times being used for getting through tickets. Is that what you mean, Lorraine?
Yeah, so because we need to get at least the major, if we want a stable release, we need to get at least the major tickets, and we need to solve the canonical URL issue.
This is
And
not
1216
this is
is
not
pretty
a
close.
ballot of CA baseline. This is the ballot of core. Is that correct?
Yep, it's putting it out for essentially that, and it's just that first preview of like that subset.
Okay, because I haven't seen core yet. I thought we were talking about
Correct.
balloting CA baseline.
I was looking at core stuff, which is where I say, like, for us, we need the core stuff done before midsummer, so that we can start leveraging it for our stuff. And same time, we got to push our patient summary through, because we got a deadline on that for the end of December.
So Sheridan, is it CA core or CA core plus?
So, I mean, it's the profiles under the CA Core Plus program, but they're patient, practitioner role, and organization. So they're like the more generic. These are the rules that are expected to be shared across the information model, and not applied in the context of like patient summary or e-referral.
Okay, it's interesting because I think in our presentation 2 weeks ago, they said some of the stuff wouldn't be published by this time.
So basically the profiles, the early preview is what we're calling it, right? It's 0.1. This is to get folks an eye on what's been coming out for review and feedback in the framework translates into a set of those profiles. And so we've gotten kind of that initial framework that has kind of gone out and is like with folks for review and feedback. And
it's gone out in
through the
slideware
groups.
Yes, but when I asked if at partnership if there's any place where I could actually see the framework and not the slideware, she says not yet.
I can chime in on that if you want, Sheridan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Lorraine, if you want to send an email to connectedcare@chi-hi.ca, I believe there is still opportunity to participate. I think at partnership you asked about the models specifically. Is that right?
I did specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just send an email to connectedcare@chi-hi.ca and let them know that you're interested in participating. I can put the email in the chat as well.
That seems to be inappropriately specific to me.
The email address?
No, the one person at a time participating, Because if we're going to put out a broad ballot of these, seeing at least the part of the framework in non-slide deck, where I think is part of the review. Anyway, I think I'm taking us down a rabbit hole. I should stop.
No, and I mean, I wouldn't say it was one person at a time per se. Like, I think there was a strategic outreach at first to build up the group, but there's still opportunity to become involved if you want to. And it's also going to be very iterative. Like, there will be multiple opportunities to review the content. But I think right now, if you want to be involved at that level of detail, the best way to do that is to send an email to Connected Care, or I could do it on your behalf.
Yeah, it's going to take me a while to get to it. And the reason I'm asking is because these particular profiles are sort of central to the work in the registry's work, where I've got colleagues working. And that's why I was concerned about it being just me being involved, because that's actually not technically part of my role, but it's my role to represent, right?
Lauren, it's Camille. Do you want me to take a look as well?
Yeah, it actually might be better to Cami for you to be involved than for me to be involved.
Yeah, get it. So would you be able to
carry on?
Oh,
Back what you were doing.
sorry, Dean, I think you've got off mute.
would you be able to just send the email to just send me the email address, and so I'll reach out.
I think she put it in the chat.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. Okay.
Yep.
All good. Thanks.
That's good. I won't distract us much more than that. Sorry.
So circling back to it, you know, I think like we've got a runway here where we have the opportunity to, like, ahead of, you know, like the period where we're asking for feedback, to actually kind of try to go through the content together, try to like talk about how things map from what we know into the interpretation that is the profiles. Like, we have that opportunity, but part of it is just figuring out how we want to balance that against our existing priorities. So, like, if folks aren't immediately concerned about the dates, what I would say is what we should try to focus on our next governance call would be around, like, how can we make this like as positive experience as possible by supporting kind of those reviews together that might be in that like kind of early December period, where we can just kind of walk through the content together and balance and decide what is the right balance of using our like traditional sequencing for some combination of the issue log and this. Does that seem fair, or do folks still kind of want to kind of chew on the dates for a bit before we even think about that in our next governance call? Is anyone saying they do want to chew on the dates more, or can I take no mention as kind of, yeah, let's start talking about the practicalities of this at our next session next Friday? Okay. All right. Oh, go ahead.
I think these dates are gonna be challenging, but I also, you know, I don't know. For me to review an implementation guide typically takes 1 to 2 full days. And I don't know what we're gonna get through in 3 Friday sessions of an hour. So, yeah, I don't know what we say is gonna change things.
I think the big question would be, if we were to compare it to what baseline shows, depends how much different it is. Because if there's huge amounts, then it's going to take us a lot of time. If they're fairly close, then it's probably not going to be too hard to get through. Just my guess, though. But
and like right now, right, it's not an implementation guide, it's just 4 profiles. So it will be helpful, I think, to get a sense for how this works with you know, a smaller set of profiles, because if we do want to do this kind of in the next round, as the next iteration comes out, if there's a larger set of profiles and implementation guide content that comes with it, it'll help us assess that. But let's say, just given that we've already spent close to half the hour of the profiling call, like if folks kind of want to continue chewing on that, and maybe we can talk about some of those practicalities, we can reopen the conversation around dates next Friday. Sound fair?
Good.
Okay. So the next kind of major topic area, because to Lorraine's point, like our focus has to be trying to, from the baseline perspective, get through our community issue log items. So we are building up the credibility and the assurance and the leverageability of our content, right? Because we've been sitting on a lot of our issues for a while, and we've taken this much more dedicated approach to just making our way through. So last session, we focused on something that actually, we had one ticket, and I'll put it in the chat, but it actually, upon looking at the remainder of the extensions that we have, because the ticket came up with Aboriginal Identity Group, that we had the same problem across a couple different extensions. And I think it's a helpful one to talk through, not just from a practice perspective and like a modeling perspective, but also we should probably confirm that the change that we made for Aboriginal Identity Group is the same type of change that we want to apply for these others. So I've got, let me pull it up real quick. I have the change that we made last time. So why don't I actually show you what it looks like first. Okay, so this is what's currently like out in our CI build, because the change that we made last time hasn't been pushed up yet, because we want to walk it through with you folks. So the issue that was raised originally was that the slicing in the issue in the chat was that we were slicing in this extension, but not defining a parent for the slice. So we were slicing on value coding, but we didn't actually put like a discriminator and the like actual slicing logic in place for what would normally come above value coding. So it would be on value X, right? Which we didn't have here. We just jumped right into the slice name with no discriminator. And so that was something that wasn't previously checked in the validator and is now being checked. But when we reviewed this, we thought, well, is what we're trying to do here actually a slice, right? Are we saying that if you supply coding, these are the constraints, or is what we're trying to actually do constrain the actual data types that are available entirely for this value? And what we had like talked through was, actually, I think what we're trying to do is say, for this extension that we've defined, the only value data type that we expect is coding. And there are additional expectations that go with that. So this is the kind of the version that has been modeled in our CI build when we made that modification to actually remove the notation of the slicing. So I'll show you what it looks like when we did that. And we can look at it side by side. Okay, so we can see on this one, right, you've got your choice of data type, value X, and we've narrowed down, and this is the differential, right? So we've narrowed down any of the types to just coding. Now, we still had expectations like supply a system and a code and a display, or sorry, system and a code, that's why we had min of 1. And so we then took this value X and like followed it in the path to .system.code. But this is different from what we're seeing here. If we look here. So like this part looks very similar, right? But we've removed the utilization of the slice entirely. And the difference being Like if we wanted to allow other data types, but said, well, if you're using coding, use this terminology, then slicing might be appropriate. But I think with what folks had asked, they wanted to see it rendered. Is this what we meant? Which is, it's a constrained data type with these additional expectations. Just looking better to folks?
It is, but it's really unusual to use coding in this context.
Instead of codable concept?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the reasoning, Lorraine, I'm guessing being that a lot of times you might also want to provide a text that goes along with your
Mhm.
and maybe you might want to provide additional coding values. And that
Yeah.
might, without being on the calls that this was originally discussed in, I don't know if that constraint was intentional, which was to say that like we only ever want this. Well, I look at preferred, I think maybe that isn't the case.
Yeah. Every time I've had anything reviewed at international, they say no, generally use codable concept. But
Would we have any other reason for, sorry, go ahead.
Probably from US Core. And they're using a coding for race.
okay. It just it's an uncommon thing in the international specs. So it just caught my eye. But coming back to the question at hand, I think this is, once setting the data type side, I think this is where we want to go.
Would anyone say that this isn't where we want to go for this type of extension?
I suspect it's heading in the direction we want to go. I think there's another error.
Okay, go ahead, Elliot.
In your, if you can flip over to the JSON of the modification.
Can do one better. I can flip over to the actual differential. Okay, so here's
Right.
the JSON for identity group.
Okay, so I suspect that should be starting on line 73. ID is value extension dot value coding.
Ah, yes.
Like that.
Yeah,
We still keep the choice there, right? In the path.
I'd need to double check that.
Okay. We can also run it. It just takes a little bit. Let me run it. We'll see. So while we run this, I want to also talk about this pattern for birth sex. And there was one that was around like, so it's in a bunch of places. Some of them which we have defined, and some that we've kind of utilized as like references from other places. So birth sex was one where, similar to US Core, we had tried to, apply this expectation on coding where system encode with a birth sex example. The current US Core basically just doesn't even go, it slims the target of the data type to just code. So, which is interesting, because it's different than coding. And it also just doesn't really go into whether or not we care about system and code. And that's a pretty common like practice now that we're seeing in US Core, which is like they don't go into the like nested elements. But in thinking about applying this approach consistently, I think my question is, would we look at just taking the same approach and like that we did for Aboriginal identity group and keep our system code requirements on birth sex?
I think we've got two different issues. One is, are we doing things grammatically correct? And the other is, do we want to change the data type, and the value set and things like that? So yes, I think we should fix the grammar. That's a no-brainer in my mind.
Yeah. So if we're compartmentalizing, like the ticket is to deal with this extension error, and then we can kind of come back to what are the other things that we want to fix about this? Because my mind went to, okay, we've got this must support here, but we're not consistently utilizing that. Like, is anyone not in favor of like making the same choice, that the goal is to slim a data type, not to provide modeling should you choose a certain data type for this one?
So-
I'm not sure what you mean by that, Sheridan.
Well, like when I look at slicing, sometimes I think what there's two ways of interpreting this. One is, if you're going to supply a coding, it should be, well, please try to use birth, sex, and you should always supply a system in your code. But you could supply other things if it's a slice. But if it's like what we talked about with Aboriginal Identity Group, the whole point is, if you use this extension, only supply a data type of coding.
Well, so this is saying, if we look at this, and I mean, the challenge here is that it's saying we're using slicing, but we aren't defining anything on, a discriminator for that. So, but this is saying that you have to have a value coding slice, because it's 1-to-1
Yeah,
on the line you're on. And the definition of extension is that there has to be exactly one of the value elements within it. So we aren't really saying if you want to put value string in, that's a possibility. But if you want to use a coding, you should be using birth sex. No, what we're saying is you have to have a value coding in there, and we're recommending birth sex as the value set for it.
That's fair, because this additional aspect here creates that constraint.
And on this particular one, I know we're sort of originally based it off US core, but we should make sure that we're not totally incompatible with the R5 reported sex or gender.
So, if we, on the issue, make the change to this, like the structure, if I'm on, let me actually go to our community issue log. Should we put in, I just want to note the places that we want to come back and have an issue on, for, where's my extension? Birth sex. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, it's a value set. Okay. Thought we had two extensions for a second. Okay. So if we are thinking about that secondary corrections for birth sex. So Lorraine, you said birth sex extension. Confirm value set and strength. Align.
Yeah, sure.
What else? And I know I have my eyes on that must support. Decide whether must support should be removed on URL and value.
You can't not support
I was gonna say, if
the
you're using
URL.
yeah, it's mandatory. And if you're using extension, it's almost redundant,
Yeah.
right? Because there's no point in using the extension without the value.
Anything else do we, like, I don't know, I don't, one way or the other, I think it's just a modeling question about whether or not we still continue to say, if you're gonna supply coding, make sure you send system in a code, but, are we comfortable with that staying the way it is, just for consistency's sake? Or do we wanna put it in?
So strictly speaking, you can just send a code if in a coding.
Yeah.
You can just send a system in a coding. So I think requiring that both of those are present is reasonable. Particularly if we are gonna say that birth sex is an example.
Yeah.
We have no idea what value set you're gonna be choosing from for the content.
That's fair. Any other things before I submit this statement? Because I don't think we'll talk about it today, because there is actually one more I want to go through that has this modeling change that we need to do that I want to confirm. I suppose we can also add to the ticket.
I think the other thing would be to review whether the data type is correct.
All right.
We might need to step back and figure out the intent of this extension. In order to figure out whether the data type is correct and what the value sets we want to recommend are. But yeah.
I think it's a
I
good
agree.
candidate for our next profiling call, because it'll allow us to actually get a little bit deeper into we have actually another ticket also on the sex and gender harmony, like when to highlight them. So we could tackle both at the same time. There was one that stood out to me. I think it was service language. Let me pull it up, as being slightly different in my mind. Okay, so let's take a look at the extension service language. I'm just in the build right now. Okay, so this was one where basically maybe we've already kind of talked about this, but my thinking is that like there might be some where we would anticipate some folks would use coding versus codable concept. In this case, I'm wondering if maybe just having made the choice of codable concept here makes it that optionality possible. But like,
Well, coding is part of codable concept.
yeah, but there's no like there's no cases where we would anticipate for service language or for, there's one other one, I think identifier version, where anything other than one target type would be expected or should be put forward.
Yeah, I might almost argue that this could be a code.
I think Lloyd would argue with you.
Well, the issue is we've got a code system that defines all languages.
Yeah, and the common language, well, so the R4 base had common languages as the primary code system. The R5 has all languages with the option of using common languages. They basically
Which is a
define,
subset.
which is a subset, so that you have access to all the additional languages that aren't in common languages, which is one of the differences between R4 and R5 and some of the other language elements, because I ended up having to dive into that a little while ago.
Is this not in the extension registry? No. I guess not. Okay.
But if you look at practitioner, I think, communication.language, there's a difference between R4 and R5, and they've flipped around which one was primary. The R4, the common languages, was primary, and R5, the all languages, is primary. But there's a benefit if you're going to use, if you're going to want to provide the optionality between the two code systems, codable concept is probably more flexible.
Well, it's not a difference between code systems, it's value sets.
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry, I misspoke.
And so if we bind it to that value set, or sorry, that code system, you can choose either of the value sets and still meet the requirement.
Yes, well, but we've bound it to a value set in this case.
As preferred.
So before we talk about changing though, the value set, I guess my question is maybe more broad than that, which is to say that like, regardless of whether or not an issue, we need to put in an issue for changing a data type or changing the value set on this one, like, are there any of these that make us think, oh, maybe we shouldn't like limit the data type to this one option? So the ones that we have are Aboriginal identity group, Aboriginal identity indicator, birth, sex, ethnicity, data estimated, identifier version, no fixed address, service language. Are there any in there that like folks are thinking, oh, that might be one that has some variability in the data types that are provided?
Let's go to the codable concept. That's the, I think, it's maybe more appropriate.
So I think that's a separate change than like to say, do we think that we should slim to a single data type? Because some of these will be codable concepts, some won't be. We'll have to evaluate that. But like, is there any reason why any of these would need, like, I don't think date estimated would need a date or a date time option, because you could just put date time, right?
Yeah. The date is particularly used when you're like, what somebody's birthday, and there is no implied time zone on it. And that's the real difference between using a value date versus value date time and only filling it into the date. But I don't think there's any of these that we would say you might want to provide a codable concept or a coding, or you might want to provide
A string or a codable
string
concept.
or a period. I don't think any of these are like that. I think we can choose an appropriate single data type for all of these. Now, we may not have chose the right one to date, but I think we can settle on, for each of these, a single one.
Would anyone feel that that isn't the case and that there should be exceptions from this list? Because if not, I can go through, make the corrections, at least then it's not throwing errors, and then we can focus more on what would be like an enhancement or like modifications to things like which data type we chose, which binding is put forward, that kind of thing. Okay. I'm gonna pull up, I just got the notation that my build is ready. So let's take a look at the other change that we put in earlier to remove the value X from the ID. So that would be this one. Let me see. Wait. That's, let me just make sure.
And also slicing name is very interesting because that is my understanding, doesn't comply with the element definition. So I don't think there's just my personal opinion. There should be no slicing issue here. And yeah, might not need to list all those details about data type as well.
What I can't figure out is why, when I ran my build, this
Put it back
change
in.
wasn't
Have you
hard.
refreshed that page?
Yeah, let me just actually try to open it. Fresh. Maybe it didn't like it at all.
And didn't build? Why don't you open up the QA?
Yeah, actually expose those data details of data type really confused, sometimes for me, confuse me at least.
I don't know. I made sure I saved. I'll run it one more time. We'll just confirm. But that's very strange. So basically the only thing it would hold me back from is like making that same simplification here to just say value coding instead of value X. But
Yeah, and there's no slicing issues here. There's no slicing. Remove those at least from JSON. Remove all those from value X below. Just leave it at value X. Maybe you just pick out one data type based on data type code colon codable concept, and remove the rest for system. Seed ID for system, ID for code, ID for display from JSON.
Because
Sorry.
what it says value X could be value, yeah, I see. Yeah, if we went just down to value with the data type of codable concept or coding, it would be much simpler. Now, if you wanted to provide other data types for value, you want where your value could be a coding, value could be a string, value could be a URL, then that would make more sense. But if we just want to code, going with value and then the appropriate code data type, which I think is probably codable concept, but
so you're saying like, because I'm wondering if maybe the reason it did that was because I kept value X in the path.
yeah, because we're not really giving a choice of value data
Yeah.
types, because that's what value X is about, right?
Yep. Let me try running that again. I hate how long it takes. But we can see if that changes the display.
This is one of the
Um,
nice things about using Sushi. Is if
Mhm.
first of all, it will generate it correctly, and second of all, you can just run Sushi without running the builder to make sure that the content is correct.
You're not waiting 15 minutes every time that you make a substantial change, really?
No.
So do folks like this, if this works and this shows value coding and then subsequently anything we display beyond that, do folks like this approach more? So if this does display without the X, would this be what we wanted to show for the others?
The data type shouldn't show in this element list.
This one, well, it will show like even if even if the data type was constrained in FHIR, like you're still going to see something in the type column.
Yes, and I'm not sure how to control it, but actually there's a different they are element. I do agree sometimes, but it really sometimes, from my understanding, could confuse audience if they really do not have a clear concept between the element in the data type and the element in that resource.
So I don't think there's really much we can do about this displaying, and I think we just need to make sure that folks, like for folks on the call, when you're seeing system, code, and display, these are elements that are under this data type. So like if I were to open up that data type today, you would see system, version, code, display. And the reason they're rendering this way is because we've, oh, well, it's building right now, was because we've explicitly called them out in
Yes, but it's unusual to call out sub-elements of a data type as the different choices for the value.
Yeah, if there's no any specific constraint on all the on those child element, kneel down into the data type, just remove those IDs. And in the JSON, I'm not sure if the JSON can just
Yeah, I don't think we really need a choice unless we want to provide a different data type than a coding data type.
I think maybe you guys might be talking about two distinct things. So in this run, we've removed the choice, but the reason, Thomas, to your point, we've called out system and code and display is because there are constraints here, and that there is a min of 1 for the reason that Elliot had brought up previously, which is to say, like, when you don't have a let's say like a required or a fixed coding system, like if we don't apply this constraint here, it would mean that they could send a code really of anything without a system.
But I think we can still constrain the fields within an element without listing them as choice.
So what change would we do here to do that?
Okay, I'm not used to writing the detailed code. But you should still be able to say value.system and make it mandatory. I think what we'd have to do actually is provide constraints to the data type itself.
Yeah, I was wondering if that, so I've done that in the past where I've like, and we've done it in the baseline where we've consistently applied constraints to identifier.
Mhm.
I don't know if we've done that to coding.
well, let's roll back to the previous question, and if we need to replace coding with a codable concept, or maybe give extra data type like string, something there. Yeah, it's too over, from my perspective, it's over constrained.
Looks like we've only done it with the identifier data type. So in cases, so basically like it's the same level of constraints to take this approach, right? You're still, for identifier, there's still an application of you've got to supply a system, you've got to supply a value, but the difference is if I just go to like a place where it's used, it makes the view cleaner when we just have identifier and we say, okay, well, here's the profile you fit to. So it's like abstracting some of the constraints from this view, but applying them here. So I've had it work in some places. I've had it like been missed in others. We did it with the PSCA because we had a consistent rule that we were applying for our codable concepts and our codings. I don't know if we have that same, I'm guessing we probably have that same rule with our codings in the CA baseline, but
You're right, actually. If there's no other choice, it's better just to put constraint in that specific profile files instead of put a constraint in that specific in that data type. That will be very, very how to see, not a very positive impact downstream. But you're right. I'm sorry. I withdraw my bit. But with the current provision of the coding data type, the previous rendering is okay.
so if this works and we're getting close here, then I think what we'll see, might just have to tweak this a little because I saw this halfway through. Whatever the one that just takes away the X is probably what we'll apply if we can get it to do that. And I can do that across the board for these extensions. We only have a minute left. I'm gonna take advantage of this because we've got Elliot on the line and this was one that he had. I want to just confirm if this is still a real ticket. So let me see. 1388 was on, I think, practitioner, potentially practitioner role. It's old and it was around the binding on a code versus a coding. Do you mind, Elliot, taking a look at this one and just telling us if it's still relevant? I didn't think it was, but if it is, then we'll highlight it on the next call. So you don't have to tell me right now, but like next call, I think it should be a really quick fix if it is still relevant. Otherwise, we can just close it out.
That was the one you just pasted?
1388, yep. I think
Okay.
it's in relation to practitioner. So potentially that leaves us with, I think there's a larger discussion around practitioner role for the terminology differences that we need to have. There's a few that are there. And then what are folks' preference for the next profiling call? Do we want to talk about the data types or do we need to focus on, well, here, actually, I'm going to put this on its head. If you have an opinion that a data type in one of our extensions should change, put a community issue log item against it. We will continue working through the community issue log and can once we know which data types have or which extensions have issues against them, we can deal with it. But trying to stay principled and getting through the log before we are doing kind of a broad-based review. So for next time, I think probably these two, and then I would like to actually talk about there's a couple in ethnicity that's part of the ethnicity extension that we should go through. We didn't get to apply any beyond the extension one today, but there should be a few in the recent QA ones that we can apply next time. Practitioner
Do
role.
we need to talk
preference for
about the canonical URL?
So we have it for the governance agenda next time, other than
Okay.
the update we provided last week. There's been no major changes. I think we're going to talk to TSC about it on the 11th.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thanks.
Yep. Okay, all right. Well, for once, I'm gonna let you guys off at a decent time. But I will see you guys sometime next week.
Thanks, Sheridan.
Sheridan, would you mind sticking around and Shannon and Lorraine for just a second?
Sure.
Yes. Let me just ping someone and then I can talk. Okay, I'm good.
So we're
Just checking a second, Elliot, just before you start. Are you okay with this in the recording? Because it's still recording.
Oh, hold on. Yeah, let me.
yes, if you don't mind.